Welcome to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. And fraud is something that we're quite familiar with in Canada. More than 500,000 people deal with fraud every year. And a lot of that fraud takes place in people's homes. And as our guest today, we have Dawn Winstone, who is a radio personality that most of us know. And Arif is going to tell us a little bit about why she's here with us today.
Well, welcome, Tara, and glad to have you on the show. You are no stranger. You've been in many people's homes, uninvited or otherwise, I'm sure. But we're thrilled to have you on the show. So welcome. I want to give you a moment to say hello to everybody.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad I'm not glad it happened to us, but I'm looking forward to telling our story in hopes that it doesn't happen to someone else, because we made a lot of mistakes along the way, and I don't want anyone else to have to do that too.
And that's the interesting thing. I mean, you are a radio personality. People have a relationship with you. Sometimes it's a bit one way in the sense that, we know more about you, and we know about your sense of humor and the stories that you tell. And we've grown up with you, so to speak, in Simcoe County. And then suddenly we find out that, how can something like fraud happen to you? And so you did grace the social, the interweb, if you will, the social media platforms with a story that I think would catch some people off guard, but at the same time, probably was quite relatable to people. And so we're glad that you're here and we're glad that you're okay, but let's get into some of that. Why don't you give us a little bit of background for those of us who aren't familiar with your story? And this was centered around something that is not unique. Over the last couple of years, people have been renovating their homes and they haven't been traveling to Disney or Europe, and they decided to getting into the spirit of building a backyard oasis or beautifying their home where we've been cooped up for the last 2 years. And you decided to do exactly that. And
it didn't turn out so well for us. And it's exactly like you said, we love to travel. We haven't been doing that. And we decided we wanted a home that we could create our backyard oasis, have the pool, have all of that. And we thought now's the time to do it. And so market was good. We got a really good price for our house. So we decided to do that. So we moved in May, but after a couple of days in the new house, we realized that we couldn't sit out in the back porch. The sun is absolutely brutal out there. I mean, it's just, I'm not a sun worshiper. And I looked next door and saw that the neighbors had this beautiful back porch covered. And because they had found the same thing. So the contractor that did theirs wasn't available. But Chris and I, my partner and I, decided to have it done for our house as well. Because, we weren't sitting out there between 11 and 5, which are primetime pool hours. So we were missing out on a lot of good pool time. So we decided to do it. I called my regular contractors. I usually use two that we've had great experiences with over the last couple of years. And they were busy until the next spring because of, it's not just I think people creating their backyard oases. Locally here in Barrie, the tornado had a huge impact on how many, contractors were available at the time. So they were busy right up until the spring. So, and this is where we made one of the mistakes that we made, was that we were more determined. We wanted it done soon. Mm-hmm. So I put the post up on Facebook looking for a contractor, and that's where the suggestions start come in.
Yeah, it's an interesting scenario. I mean, I think first and foremost, just framing things out a little bit. Framing things out. There's a construction term, but anyway, people. We forced ourselves in one way, shape, or form. We forced ourselves to reprioritize. We realized, well, first and foremost, we were all told, hey, everybody, let's nip this in the bud. It's only going to be 2 weeks. And if we do our part, we're going to flatten the curve. 3 months later, 6 months later, we realized that, well, things weren't exactly going to plan and we couldn't go elsewhere. So how are you going to make past the time? How are you going to change your life, adapt your life? And this is what you chose to do. And I don't think you did anything that was out of the norm, right?
No, definitely not. And that's what everybody else was thinking too. And so when I put up the recommendation, asking for recommendations on Facebook, I got a lot of ones that commented publicly, but privately, I got a message from a contractor who had asked if he could come out and pitch the job. And we had already had 2 contractors lined up from the Facebook post to pitch the job as well. He came out to see the backyard, and his quote was on par with what the other 2 had offered. But what we were impressed with this guy was, he definitely talked a good game, and I definitely picked up a bit of a smooth talker there. And I'm not going to lie, I did think, I maybe ignoring my alarm bells in the beginning were my big mistake, but I thought maybe he just really believes in himself. Maybe he's just really good at what he does and he knows it and he's confident. That's good. But he dropped a lot of names that we mutually knew. He seemed to know a lot about, engineering, which he said he had an engineering background. He wanted to be by the book. He said, I'm going to go through the permit process with you. I'm going to send you all the documentation you need. What we got from him was a promise to start early. And when I asked him why he was available when nobody else was, he said that he had 30 guys waiting to work. So he said he could choose a team from those 30 guys. That's why he had the time. So he had an answer for everything. I did ask him everything I could think of. He had sent me about 50 pictures with past jobs that he had done. And turns out, I don't even think 5 of them are his. Like I think maybe,
Yeah. And that seems to be the tough thing is people talk the game, as you say, but and it's a bit of work, it's a bit of effort to get those references and actually speak to those references and find out what their experiences have been. And it's oftentimes, sorry to say it, it's hindsight where we say, I wish I did or I should have. Because there's some of these fraudsters they're getting more and more creative at what they do.
Absolutely.
And anyone can put up an internet site and put lots of nice pictures up there and make themselves look like something that they really aren't. And it's unfortunate, and it's not judgmental for me pointing it out. It's to you because it's just so easy for any and all of us to be taken in by some of what's being put out there.
Well, and that's just it. I mean, if you look at, whether you watch Catch Me As You Can with one of the wonderful actors in the world out there who basically commits frauds all over the world, but he's got this wonderful, charismatic sort of nature about him, very convincing. Who wouldn't want to fall in love with the dreamy smile and all the right words, whatever. And I'm not saying that's what happened, but you're right. These guys, girls, people can be very sophisticated in that. And you have to imagine if this person's done it to you, they've probably done it before.
They've had some practice.
They've had some practice at doing it. And you actually asked one of the questions that I was going to ask. It was like, listen, if everybody else is booking till next spring, what is it? Like, why was this person available? But he had an answer. You asked the question. And so, I'm going to say, well, I would have been caught up on that one too, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I should have been more. I mean, I look at it now and I probably should have been, because my other contractor uses me as a reference, the one that I have good luck with. Mm-hmm. And, I know how detailed they've been in their questioning of me. And so I should have taken that to myself and said, okay, I need to dig even deeper than that. And just some of the things that he said were, all the questions I had, he had an answer for. Why do we have to pay you up front? He wanted, he gave us a payment schedule, and 10,000 of the 23,000 that was, he was charging us for it, 10,000 was due up front in two separate payments. And he said it was for pre-construction costs, but I don't know anything about construction. I didn't challenge. I asked him about it, but I said, I've never had to pay a deposit before. He said, well, it's because
pre-construction costs.
Yeah. He said, everybody's so in such high demand. I've been screwed too. So he said, I have to make sure my guys get paid. It was all this, Well, it turns out he doesn't have any guys. There are no guys. And when I asked,
there might be multiple personalities there, though. That there might be those guys.
Maybe, maybe. Not one of them showed up to do my porch, though.
No. That's unfortunate.
Anyway, so we gave him the two payments against my better judgment. My biggest mistake here was ignoring my gut instincts. And I said, I just feel funny about this. And every time I asked him, he had a good answer, though, and the materials are going to be delivered tomorrow. He must have said this in writing 3 or 4 times. Mm-hmm. Materials never showed up. We never saw him after the second payment. Haven't seen him since.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm making a long story very short. But essentially, I started to feel like something wasn't right. I know most contractors are not usually to the letter on time with when they tell you they're going to do things. But, when I'd given him $10,000 and not one of the things thus far that he promised had happened, I started to get really suspicious. So the emails started and the promises from him, no, they're going to be delivered tomorrow. He had an answer for everything. And eventually a friend of mine said, listen, why don't you call the city of Barrie? Because he kept telling me it was in permits or he had it waiting for engineered drawings, all kinds of excuses. And so I called the city and said, what's the status? Have you had any requests for permits or anything like that? And apparently nobody had called about our house in 12 years.
Wow.
So he had not been in conversation with anyone in the program.
And I doubt very much he was working with an engineer to build a backyard patio either.
Yeah,
So
no, there was never any
excuses.
evidence of that. Yeah, there was no drawings. We didn't see a thing. So I called. I also called all the home hardwares where he said the stuff was, his materials. I called all the home hardwares and asked them if there was an order there waiting for porch fix, like the things you would need for a porch. And I had a list of some of the materials, and they said no. But one home hardware said he was a client there, and they said he hasn't ordered anything for over a year.
Wow.
So yeah, so I knew that claim of having materials was also false, and that's when I knew I think I've been defrauded. Yeah.
So this was not just as there's many cases of the contractor who's taken on far more work than he can handle and is delaying and delaying. This was deliberate and intended fraud that was being perpetrated on.
Yeah.
And you know what? Arif alluded or touched on it earlier on. Just the environment that's been created, I guess, as a result of the pandemic, but certainly over the course of the pandemic. And that is the increase in people doing work on their homes. We're nesting a lot more now, and we want to turn our homes into something more. So, yeah, I mean, if you drive into any parking lot for any building center in or around town, the lots are full any time of the day, 7 days a week. People are doing work on their homes. Contractors, people are having to revert to their second, third, or fourth, or total strangers because the one they want is booked, as you say, until next year. So we're
Mike,
kind of forced into a scenario.
Yeah, and I want to be careful here on the show. Obviously, what's happened to Tara Dawn is you here, Tara Dawn. You're right here in front of my face. It is unconscionable. It's horrible. It's a terrible thing for someone to do or to have had done to them. And that being said, at the same time, the reality is, Mike, as we've talked about over the last couple of years of the show, in fact, we were the ones who were promoting people saying, hey, you're in lockdown. You're not going anywhere. You're not going to Europe. You're not going on a cruise. You're not going to Disneyland. Why don't you take those same dollars that you would have spent outside the country or elsewhere and redeploy them into your own home and build yourself a beautiful home, build yourself some equity, build yourself a staycation is a term that became very popular over the last couple of years. We, in fact, promoted that a couple of years. And so,
for sure.
Clearly all Canadians decided to listen to us and did that because there was a run on the hardware store. There was a run on the mill. There was a run on all that stuff, and prices went through the roof. Here's the point that I want to make. There are some incredibly phenomenal and reputable contractors out there, and we certainly are not here to take anything away from them. In fact, they are the ones who probably feel this quite hard themselves because there's a bad apple out there that's destroying the reputation of some otherwise incredible, integrity-based contractors out there. The challenge is with all that demand that came out, everybody in a pickup truck who wasn't working, who was staying at home, decided that they were going to become a weekend warrior or a handyman and a contractor. And so what we're hoping to do over the next couple of minutes, just after we come back from break, is maybe break that down a little bit and help out in terms of what are some things that we should look for to ensure that you are protected and you're protecting yourself. But we do have to go to break right now. Mike and Tara, thanks for being with us on the show. Stay with us for more fascinating information, the story that Tara endured herself on a sort of a disaster DIY, if you will, when we're back after this break.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and our guest today is Tara Dawn Winstone, who is reciting to us the details of home fraud, contractor fraud that she has experienced within the last year here. And it's quite a fascinating story, and it's not an unfamiliar story for most of us. I think it's more prevalent than one would think, the incidents of fraud and dealing with people. And certainly in the climate that we have right now during the pandemic, there seems to be more and more people doing work at home. But let's get back to you, Tara. I want you to finish your story. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, well, so we sort of finished off with I started to figure out something was up, and so at this point I called the Barrie police, and who were very kind, but basically said it's going to be really tough to prove this. Normally this is a civil matter, but I since have found out that anything over 5,000 is actually a criminal matter.
Right.
So I didn't really have a lot of luck. They went back and forth with the contractor. They would call him, and he would have a reason or excuse for everything. And then he started telling him how we actually owed him money still, because of all of his pre-construction expenses. And so, I knew we were dealing with someone who's pretty nervy here. And the police officer said it's not looking good for him because he didn't put any work at all into it. And I've since learned that a popular saying in this type of situation is one nail, no jail. So it's really hard for them to prove fraud if they have begun the work. So it's much harder, not impossible, but much more difficult, because then the police have to decide, was the work just not done well? What was completed? What's that worth? So it becomes much more complicated. So we're actually, I hate to say lucky, that he didn't do one thing for our project. So
you're very lucky. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. There is a term actually in law where I think the police were going with the civil matter versus a criminal matter is that the term that they would use is specific performance. So if he actually put in a single nail but didn't complete the job, you would civilly pursue him for completing the job as described. In your case, he hadn't actually started it. So you're definitely lucky in that regard.
For sure. So I didn't have a lot of luck, to be honest. He said, well, as long as you're still communicating with him, just keep it going. And, and maybe he'll give you money back. So anyway, then I came across a picture of somebody's porch that he had used to sell me my porch. So I thought, that's the picture because it was the porch that I chose for mine. I said, I want that one. So I contacted her and I said, this is going to sound really weird, but I'm coming out of left field, but that's the porch that my contractor used to sell me his services. What was your experience with him? Well, turns out she'd had exactly the same experience, only he had actually started her project. He didn't finish it, but he had started her project, and she was in the midst or part of an OPP investigation involving him already. So she gave me the number of the officer that was dealing with her case. And after talking to him, he said that he's been researching this guy for 5 years and trying to get him. And I guess he had previous charges they were looking for him, basically. So
sounds like
that's sort of, what was that? Sorry, Mike?
I was going to say, sounds like there's potential for a class action suit here, maybe with this.
I don't know. We're still sort of in the midst of all of it. And so then he said, listen, I'm not dealing with this case anymore because I'm in a different department. So I'm going to put you in touch with so-and-so at the Barrie Police, and they'll be the lead detective on this case. But and so that's what we've been doing since. I gave him a statement. And from what I understand, there are charges pending. So, but because they have to prove criminal intent, and they have to prove, luckily everything is in writing. I don't know why he put everything in writing, because it only shows if he had intention to defraud us.
Well, I think that there's some interesting things to come out of this. I mean, the reality is he was rather well prepared, but the other reality is, as you described earlier, not only did the police find out, and they did their homework and they called and they asked what was going on, but this character was bold enough to decide that you owed him money. And here's what happened, in my opinion, because you have decided to, well, one, use your platform, but two, decided that you weren't going to get taken and you were going to see what you could do to help others. However, I think what ended up happening along the way is it is a strategy that the best defense is a great offense. And so what he ended up doing was he basically said, I'll show you. You think you're going to sue me? Well, I'm going to counter sue you. And it would come down to, where is the courage or fortitude or confidence or resources of the person? They have to decide, is it worth me going and suing someone for $10,000, or do I walk away from it? Am I going to hire a lawyer? Am I going to take time off work? Do I know the law well enough? Or am I just going to essentially back down and hopefully go away quietly? And I think that sounds to me like that's his strategy, certainly with the people that he has defrauded prior to you, is he just wanted to see how far you'd go. And so far he's gotten away with it.
Yeah, and it may well.
I plan to see this through to the end. I mean, I don't know if I'll get my money back, but I plan to see it through to the end. But just based on when I did the post on Facebook, and the police officer had actually encouraged me to do it. He said, just letting people know that this is out there. He said, our department is absolutely overwhelmed with these claims.
Yeah.
And so many people are ashamed to talk about it.
That's the thing, is there's embarrassment there, and no one should be embarrassed. I mean, you're doing exactly the right thing.
I'm not a criminal, so why should I be embarrassed? So that's why I put that on my post, and I had so many people contacting me saying they had also been, fooled by him. So
wow. I'm guessing, he may well be, maybe I'll be a bluff what he's doing with the countersuit. Which you'll find out. He was hoping to just scare you off. But at the same time, I think a lot of these characters get cocky. The more they get away with things, the looser they get and the more careless they get until they eventually implode. And and it looks like he's at that point right now with you.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we don't know that he has countersuit. I mean, I know that's his strategy in the past based on who I've spoken to. So I'm prepared. But he's definitely, I asked somebody that knows him, I said, I don't understand why he would do this to me, because I do have a platform with which, I could, and the person said, you know what, it's a challenge to people like that. It's the more of a challenge you are, the greater the victory for them. It becomes satisfying to them too, because she's done a lot of investigation into it. And she said, it's satisfying to somebody like that to get away with that. And the harder the target sometimes, the bigger the thrill.
Yeah.
So what we're entering into, though, really is an interesting discussion, and I think for people at home who may or may not have had some similar type of an experience, in many cases it just seems like there's someone who's deceived you. There's someone who you got scammed by someone. It's the same thing. This is not entirely dissimilar to your phone ringing and someone telling you that it's CRA and you owe them money, and if you don't send them Amazon gift cards, you're going to jail. Or it's the FBI calling you in Barrie, Ontario, and if you don't send them, cryptocurrency at the gray market ATM machine at the corner of this street and that street, you're going to jail. It happens. It's as you mentioned, Tara, the Barrie Police Service and the OPP fraud department, they are absolutely overwhelmed by cases that you and I might think, how did you fall for that one? Like, how did that possibly get past you? But it does. It's more common than we think. What is fraud?
And another type of, another way fraud is perpetrated along similar lines to what's happened with you is like you had a contractor who had no intention, by the sounds of it, of doing any work for you. They just wanted to get your money and move along. But then there are other contractors who contractors in quotes who oversell what they do, get that deposit, come in and do shoddy and oftentimes unsafe work in people's homes. And that's even scarier, especially when they're not certified and they're doing electrical and HVAC and plumbing work in your home. And there's many characters out there like that too. And that's just as much a fraud in the eyes of the law and in my mind.
That's just it, Mike. I mean, and certainly in the next segment, we can probably go into some of those things that you can look for in terms of protecting yourself. But the thing that caught me off guard, or not off guard, that gets my attention about this particular case really is the psychology or the psychological element and the emotional element that got, intertwined here. You are not just dealing with some guy who called you up and to see if he can get some quick, easy bucks off of you, but you're talking to somebody who was emotionally invested, definitely time and energy. And you almost have to wonder about the person's personality order or disorder, that they were able to go as far as they were, how intimately involved they were, how many people they have deceived. And you had some experiences with them where you really started to wonder, and some of the people you've talked to, Tara, I think you were mentioning, who really shined a bit of a light on this person's character and personality that I thought were fascinating.
Narcissist.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, nor do I play one on TV, but I definitely, looking back, see a lot of things I probably should have noticed that, where I just took as cockiness or, overconfidence. I thought, I want somebody that's confident to do the work. Yeah. And you hit on something that's so important to note there, that I didn't realize that I could right now go get a hammer, put it in my little car and say, I'm a contractor. There's no protection. Like they don't, and that's not illegal to say I'm a contractor, even though I'm not. So that
you heard it here first, folks. Sarah Dawn.
Yeah, exactly.
Sarah Dawn is going to be moonlighting with her side hustle. She'll build you a deck.
Don't ask me where we keep the hammer. I have no idea, but I'm saying that I could call myself a contractor. Anybody can. And I didn't realize that. I thought we were more protected, but as you said, and I know we're going to talk about this coming up, but there are ways and things to look out for because this guy's really good at fooling people.
Yeah.
They're really good. I'm a highly suspicious person and I'm suspicious of people. I mean, and I asked so many questions and really put him on the hot seat. And
and certainly the internet has allowed for more and more people to, be taken advantage of, and that we don't always get face to face, and certainly during a pandemic, in order to make arrangements to set up a contract with or an arrangement with someone to do work on our homes. And the other thing the internet does more and more too is you see it all the time. People go on to social media and say, hey, does anybody know a good plumber? Does anybody know a good carpenter, good painter, et cetera, et cetera? And that's good, but you still need to qualify those people. But too often, people will refer a friend or a cousin or someone they know. They don't know the quality of their work necessarily. They just know who they are and think they're doing you a favor by sharing that name.
I agree.
Well, you know what? I think that was another clue is that people would post in the comments their suggestions. He was the only one that messaged me privately. I think if he had put his name up in public, people probably would have said, I'm after you,
Yeah.
So I find it interesting. He's the only one that contacted me privately by himself, whereas the other ones it was recommended. So that should have been maybe another.
Yeah. So he was checking some of the right boxes there. He was good at what he did by the sounds of it.
Yeah. You know what, though, I do see more of this coming forward. And certainly, I want to be mindful of the fact that the dollar amount is not a small one. Nobody, whether it's $1 or whether it's $10,000, $20,000, fraud is fraud. And those are hard-earned dollars by you, the amount of effort and time and energy that you put into bringing income into your household. Certainly all the other people who have been defrauded. At the end of the day, it'll be interesting to see what the court finds, how the court is able to impose any judgment if we get that far, or if you get that far, and how many other people will be able to celebrate in that victory. Something tells me, though, that some people will be celebrating for you in principle, but not necessarily in recovery of funds. We do have to go to break. When we come back from the break, though, let's talk about what some of the things are that we learned. How can we help our neighbors and our friends to perhaps mitigate the opportunity that this might happen to them? What are some telltale signs that we can, maybe pursue and safeguard our friends and neighbors from this happening to them? So stick with us for more with Dawn Winstone. And when we come back from this break, Hitting Home, Mike and Arif, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV Barrie, and we're fortunate to have Dawn Winstone with us this week on our show. And Dawn, you have gone through something that most people say it'll never happen to me, or maybe less people are saying it anymore, that it can never happen to me because it's happened to you. You've got a platform. You're sharing your story with us. You shared it on social media. You're sharing it with us here, and our goal is to see, well, at Hitting Home is like, how can we hit home with people in the conversations that they may be having with their partner, their spouse, their children, their family, in terms of, how do we make sure that it doesn't happen to you? So you've gone through something that is rather unfortunate. It's costly. It's costly in terms of financially. It's costly, emotionally and frustrating, et cetera. You feel violated. I'm going to plant some words, but I can understand how someone might feel violated that this has happened to them. And that is that you are the victim of fraud by the way of contractor fraud. And it's not the only type of fraud out there. Fraud is prevalent. You said it yourself that the Barrie police themselves said their phones are ringing off the hook with various forms of fraud that happen. Certainly, Mike, you referenced the online types of fraud, cryptocurrency related frauds, or giving us your tax information or whatever it might be. So as we ran out the show, though, what I'd love to do is give some people some tips and things that you learned that might help them, sort of prevent this from happening to them. And let's start by, what did you learn? What would you do differently? Because you're a lovely human being. You're a nice person. Would you change any of that? Are you going to stop being nice? What would you do differently next time?
I think, my job was it was a good, and it also was a bit of a detriment to me, because I think I'm always worried about, I don't want somebody to think I'm really tough to deal with. So I think maybe I was too nice, actually, in some ways, because I didn't want, I don't want to be out there as someone that nobody wants to work with. So, I did kind of overlook a lot of things. I think I wouldn't do that again. But I think it's important to point out, and you touched on this earlier, that with the different types of fraud, that, calling the grandparents and saying, I'm in jail, I need money to get out. And you do think, how does anybody fall for that? Well, I think the general theme and what I've learned is that they know how to play on your emotions, and they know which ones are your strong ones. So for us, it was, we wanted this back porch built. We had visions of it. I mean, in my head, I was thinking, Chip and Joanna Gaines are going to feature it in their magazine. It's going to be beautiful. We're going to be lounging under this beautiful porch. And I was attached to the emotion of it without being practical enough. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the case generally with fraud. They play on your fears, your insecurities, whatever. They figure out pretty quickly how to get to you. And it's never through logic. It's usually through your emotions. So
your incitement and enthusiasm for the end result.
Yeah. And, so you have to really play on that. But there's a lot of things you could do. And when it comes to contractors, as I mentioned, there aren't a lot of anybody could say they're a contractor, but it's like you said, Arif, go to the actual site, ask to see where they're working right now. Mm-hmm. Try by it. Pay them a surprise visit. Call the people that they've done things for. Make sure they provide evidence that they've done things for. Ask if you can go see.
Don't just take their word. Actually make the call and speak to those people and get their firsthand accounts. Yes.
If you want to make sure it's an actual contractor you're working with, you can call the TSSA or go to their website. It's Technical Standards and Safety Authority. And they're basically, if they're not registered there, you shouldn't even be talking to them. Yeah. They're not. This is like a trade organization. You have to be fairly, you have to be pretty legitimate to be a part of. So Ontario College of Trades is another website you can go to make sure the person is registered with them.
Mike, I'm going to jump in just for 1 second here, because we should also be mindful. There are people out there who are looking for a deal. Let's be blunt. There are people who are willing to do a cash job with someone who's done something before.
And that's a red flag right off the bat.
How can I not pay taxes? Or as a contractor, if you pay me cash, I'll save you on the taxes. For those of us who look to maybe do a cash deal with a contractor, recognize you're setting yourself up for a likely, a negative outcome. One, the taxman may come calling on you, but two, you really limit your recourse if something does go wrong. Exactly. Vice versa, if someone is shopping you to do it for not, around taxes, then you might want to question, well, if they're not willing to pay their taxes, and by the way, we all pay taxes, but if they're not willing to pay taxes, how do I know their insurance is legitimate? How do I know that they're carrying WSIB? How do I know that they're not paying, cash daily wages to a laborer, et cetera? And if someone gets injured on the job in your, within your property boundary, they will be going after you, your homeowner's insurance. They will be going after you, not just at WSIB, but that can be very costly. So those shortcuts are never shortcuts.
Yeah.
And that's where we are lucky there. We have a record of all of our transactions. And he did actually include, here's what's going to tax in the payment schedule and work schedule, which if the government ever sees that, I'll be amazed. But I mean, he did include that. So we do have a record of all of our transactions. And that would be my number one recommendation. I know it's tempting to take the cash, say, oh, they'll give me a deal if I do cash, but it could end up costing you a lot more than you're saving.
Yeah.
And it's not a good idea.
No. And that's a big red flag when someone comes in, if you're, interviewing, getting quotes from different contractors, and one comes in ridiculously lower than where the averages are for the other, that's a red flag. Don't automatically jump on that because their price is lower, and don't automatically jump on it because they can start tomorrow.
Yeah, and
in
again,
an environment where we've got 6 months to a year, most people are waiting. And with regards to, qualifications, certain trades you need to be certified to be working. I mean, as a carpenter, anybody, like you said, can, stick a hammer in the trunk and call themselves a carpenter. But if you're doing electrical work, if you're doing HVAC work, if you're doing plumbing work in someone's home, you need to be registered. And there should be no shame in asking your contractor to show you the documents and prove that they are certified.
And then follow up on it, though. And that is, I think, what happened here. Tara, he did share with you some documents, if I understand correctly. So this guy really did cover his bases, right?
Well, and he did it without being asked. So I think that was probably, behind the scenes, probably him thinking, well, if I offer it, I won't have to ask, she won't ask me for it.
Yeah.
So that will make me look more honest. This guy knew exactly how to manipulate. This guy knew what he was doing. I mean, hats off to him for being so clever. But
well, I don't think we should compliment him so well. The sad truth is he honed his skills by screwing other people around before you. That's how we
know
got
what?
There you have it, folks.
Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. And he actually, when I was talking to the police officer, he said, this is a guy that likes to live high off the hog. He said he likes to be a business person, but doesn't actually want to do any business.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's what struck me, because I worked very hard to save that money. And this guy didn't have to lift a finger. And that bugs me. That really gets me, that I worked really hard for that. And he took it from me and he stole it. And that's where I'm like, I am going to see this through to the end, because it's the injustice of it more than it is the money. The money, don't get me wrong, is a big deal. But it's the injustice of it. It's the unfairness, being deceived. It doesn't make me want to cower and go away. It makes me angry, and it makes me want to see him pay the consequences for that.
Sure. And to hopefully thwart future incidents of him, taking advantage of someone. And it may be, someone's grandmother next, who just doesn't have the resources to recover as quickly from such a loss. So,
well, there is no shame here. And you're fortunate. You have your health, you're fortunate you are employed or you have employment, and we trust that many others, we hope that many others might be so fortunate, but you're absolutely right, Mike. This person, if they'll stoop this low, there's no level that they won't stoop to. So what are some other things that can be done though? So you can check their insurance, you can check their license, you can check with the city as you did about the permit, Tara, so good for you. You could
Better Business Bureau.
You could check credit.
That's useless. You know what? Don't do the Better Business Bureau. They can register with it.
Yeah,
but they won't put a negative claim up unless the person
is that
has
right? Was unaware.
So there's really they can't do anything. They don't really have any power. So, the Consumer Protection Agency is a good one, because you'll find out if there have been things that have been filed against them. Mm-hmm. And that's another good one. But I think the most important thing is you leave the emotion out of any decision you make when you are hiring a contractor.
Good advice.
Absolutely.
And something else I would recommend too is where you are going to need building permits. And I would say on any project you're doing, contact the city, the municipality, and find out if you're going to need those permits. And if you do, take it upon yourself to get the permits rather than leaving it to the contractor. And then you're totally assured that they're done and how soon you're going to get them and just what stage. If you just leave it to the contractor and you don't know, they can say, well, yeah, no problem. Or as in your case, tell you, we're tied up here trying to get these permits, and meanwhile, he hasn't even made the application to the city. Yeah.
I'm going to throw this out there though, as well, though, and here's a question for you, Tara, and you might not have known this, or you might not have even thought about this, but did the person show up in a pickup truck? Was there a decal on the truck? Was there signage? Was it vehicle wrapped, or was there a magnet on there? Were there business cards? Was there a website? Was there things that you can do? Yeah. To do the research, because the reality is, if he shows up in even though if it's a pickup truck, are you dealing with the individual, or are you dealing with a corporate entity, or are you dealing with a sole proprietorship that might have 5 trucks on the road, or whatever it may be? You might think that we're, splitting hairs. We're not. We're saying, if you don't want to lose out $10,000 or $20,000 and time and energy and frustration, what are some things that you can do yourself? You could pull credit. You could ask, just like landlords and tenants can deal with, they're private individuals. You could spend the $10 and ask to pull credit, and the person can decide that they don't want to do business with you. That's their choice, but it is your choice to ask, because how they treat their creditors might be an indication on how they're going to treat you.
That's a great advice. And I think another thing I would recommend for everyone is make sure most of your, if not all, your interactions are in writing. That has saved us. Like I have all of his text messages. Every time I related to him, he would try to call me, and I would insist on dealing, especially when I started to suspect things were going sideways. I would insist on dealing with him through email. So, in anything you can put in writing, do it. I mean, that is what eventually is making our case a lot easier to prove. So if you can, just try to keep track of dates when you've talked to them. Just keep track of it so that your timeline is there and it's easy for you to access if you need to. That's probably the best piece of advice to give to someone.
And your initial payment to them should be to cover the cost of the building materials for
No,
say
you should.
that first week, and you can pay them in increments. And
Nope, don't pay it at all.
yeah, you
Don't
give
give-
it all
no,
up
don't
front,
give it
or
all.
even half up front is
No,
too much,
they
I would
said,
say.
I've talked to every contractor. I've interviewed 4 of them now, and none of them
Mhm.
take pre-payment.
Yeah.
None of them. They said they shouldn't need it. If they're a good contractor and good
There you
standing,
go. That's it right
There's
there.
your sign right there.
most hardware stores, the Home Depot and whatnot, they have lines of credit for these
There you go.
contractors with standing. So if they don't have $5,000 in their that they can put on their line of credit, then you really got to
And
question.
We do have to go, but I will say that is an absolutely valid point. If the contractor doesn't have their own savings or terms, right? If you're a plumbing supply, electrical supply, they've got account set up, they've got 30 days. These suppliers who want their business and want to do business with good contractors will know that the contractor might take 30 days to get payment. They're extending terms. So we do have to go. Tara, your last thoughts, and I do hope that we get to hear from you again, whether we're following you on social media or whether we're having you back on the show. We'd love to know how this works out for you. But last thoughts that you want to share before we go.
Don't be worried about not being a nice guy. You're just looking out for yourself if you ask the right questions. Don't worry about what they're going to think of you. That's not important.
Protect yourself. Yes.
Well, thanks for sharing your personal life with us a little bit, sharing your vulnerability with it. I'm glad you don't feel ashamed, because you shouldn't. You didn't do anything wrong. As you said, you're not the bad guy in this scenario. And thank you. Hopefully through this show, we can help someone else avoid this scenario. But Mike and I do want to thank you very much for joining us today. You're a real pleasure to speak with. And what's nice to know is that the person on air is the same person who is here today with us. So thanks for being here.
I wore makeup today. That's the only difference.
We'll see you around, Tara. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. And Tara Dawn Winstone, local radio personality, has been our guest today, and she's opened our eyes to some of the intricate details of contractor fraud that she's been going through herself. And certainly it's been a lesson for all of us who are watching, and myself and Arif included, what she's been through. And I thought we could take this last segment, Arif, and talk a bit about, it's not just contractor fraud that homeowners deal with. I mean, there's a lot of fraud that takes place, unfortunately, with regards to mortgage and financing and title fraud. I thought we could just talk about some of the other areas of fraud that are prevalent out there. And hopefully we can provide a forewarning for people out there with this.
Sure. So, Mike, let's do one thing. And Tara Dawn is a wonderful person. She's a great person in the community. She's always there to help and use her platform to help people. And so,
for sure,
obviously, it's certainly, whenever this happens to anybody, it's equally traumatic. It's equally disappointing. It's equally whatever adjective you want to give to it. The fact that it happened to her, for me, is makes it just an opportunity to share her story, to be relatable to people that she's been relating to on a daily basis for years over her career.
She's not a stranger.
No, she's not. She's not a stranger. No. But here's the reality, though, Mike. The reality is, as you said, fraud can take many different forms. So let's actually break it down a little bit in layperson's terms. By no means is this a legal definition. Feel free to reference sources as appropriate. Call your lawyer if you feel you need to. Yeah. But in terms of the reality, in layperson's terminology, from my perspective, what I understand, what is fraud? It's misrepresentation. It's not doing what you said you were going to do, or putting someone else, jeopardizing their position and putting them at an increased place of risk because you were not truthful in your side of the story.
And all in anticipation of material or financial gain. And
sure. So mortgage fraud, as it applies to real estate, can be simply that you're not who you said you were. You put in an application. You said you're married. Maybe you're not married. You said you're employed. Maybe you're not employed. You offer a job letter that a friend gives you, or a phony pay stub that you were previously arranged, to make it look that you can qualify because you're a good person and you can make ends meet and you're not going to miss a payment, but the paperwork doesn't quite line up, and you're just you're working with someone who's going to do whatever it takes to make it go away, smooth things out. That's fraud. That's theft. That's deceit. And that person is putting the lender or the financial institution who's weighing the information that they're entrusting you to be delivering to them truthfully. What you're doing is you're giving them bad information, and you're putting them at risk because you're making them make a decision based on bad information.
Yeah, you're putting yourself at risk too.
Pardon me?
You're putting yourself at risk too of losing the home altogether and all your investment. And there's fraud that takes place going the other way too. That you're talking about the person making the application for financing. There are people who represent themselves as financiers out there who they'll prey on. They'll look for people, often elderly people. They'll look for people who are financially in trouble and offer second, third mortgages to them to help them get out of their situation. And the contracts are often designed in such a way that you default in one way or the other, you're at risk of losing your home. And certainly they built in some really outrageous penalties into there. And they're betting on you failing at some point down there so they can take possession of your home. So you got to be mindful of those type of predatory lenders out there.
When that happens, let us be very clear. There is a level of sophistication that is happening when that happens.
Oh, for sure.
Typically speaking, there is a lawyer who has a license, who has software that is able to go and put the charge against title. So actually I don't want to say more devastating then, but certainly a higher sense of risk is not necessarily when it's just a second or third mortgage. That becomes a nuisance. You can eventually fight that out theoretically. But there are a number of people who might have listened to their parents' advice that said, whatever you do, pay off your mortgage, get rid of it as quick as you can. That's actually not great advice. And the reason that that's not great advice is when you own title to a house without a mortgage on it, it means that nobody has placed a lien or an interest, a legal document on title that reserves their first right of refusal in terms of claim against your house. So if you own a home that has no debt against it and no mortgage on file, it's free and clear. A fraudster could very easily, through free access to information just by simply searching titles, find out which homes in the neighborhood don't have mortgages on them, be in partnership with a shady lawyer. It happens. Not all lawyers are shady. Please don't hear that we're saying that. But they could be in partnership with a shady lawyer who will help them register a mortgage against your house. Yeah. And they can forge the signature. They can forge the documents. They'll place the mortgage against your house. And then, lo and behold, magically, you will miss 3 payments. And lo and behold, you will technically be in default against that mortgage. Yeah.
And it's hard to have recourse in that scenario. And the other thing that you'll see too is identity theft. And with the internet, there's hacks, there's phishing that takes place on the internet. People get your personal financial information, your personal data, and they can, and it's taken place many times, is they'll get title to your home. They'll change title over from them to you, and especially when it's a home without a mortgage held against it or any liens against it.
Oh, absolutely.
And once they have title of your home, they quickly turn around and liquidate it, take the cash, and disappear.
And it's important. It's not that it's as easy as. There's nothing easy about it. But remember this, people who spend their productive hours of the day, if you will, conjuring up schemes, they're well educated. They know the law. They know what's going to happen. They know how to do it. They're committing fraud to make it happen. But much like in Tara's story, they also know that you've got a level of embarrassment. You've got a level of your own, maybe perhaps limited sophistication, and they're going to prey on that. They're going to prey on the fact that you may not know what to do next. Yeah. And in fact, you may be embarrassed. So you might not respond. And here's the thing, when the fraudster goes to start enforcement action against you to liquidate, but in other words, to get you out of your house, it's a process, and it's a
you could be in Florida. You could be a snowbird living in Florida, and this is all happening while you're out of the house through the winter.
And you have to prove that there's a fraud that's happened. So they could be very good. They could have good looking signatures and make things happen to make it look legitimate. You have to defend yourself against this action. The judge isn't just going to say, oh, I'm going to assume I'm going to side for you. And we're not going to let you get kicked out of your house. There's a legal process that you have to go through. So this is not to scare people, but this is to let people know mortgage fraud does happen. Frauds in general do happen. They're costly, and there are ways to protect yourself. I suppose the proper asterisk to put there would be give your lawyer a call. Ask them if you don't have a mortgage on your house. Is there something I should do, even as simple as putting a line of credit against it? Is there something I can do to protect myself?
And this is a good opportunity for me to give some advice that I give to all of my clients, and I would like to share with anyone and everyone who's watching here, is the best investment you can make in yourself as a homeowner is buying title insurance.
Title insurance.
Because many of the scenarios we're talking about here and many more, you will be protected with that title insurance policy. It's so important these days to have that. It's not overly expensive, and the investment value far outweighs whatever money you're going to spend for that. Talk to your lawyer about that, and talk to your realtor about that.
And one of the things that you can do in terms of that with regard to a first mortgage, for example, that I was talking about, is it doesn't mean that I'm telling you to take out a mortgage and carry debt and make interest payments on it. If it's a line of credit that's registered as a mortgage, you can have a zero balance on it, but there's still a document that is registered against your property. And what that does is it adds a layer of protection. Is it bulletproof? Maybe not. Ask your lawyer. But what it does is before that fraudster can make their claim, they'll at least have to go through a process with you. And when they add their charge against your title, they'd be adding it behind the person who's in front of them, the first mortgage, the bank in general. So again, talk to your lawyer about this, and title insurance 100%, Mike, agree with that.
And going back to Tara Dawn's story, there's some things I thought of, I just throw out there now. Some of those red flags, things to be leery of, and that would be the contractor, and again, contractor who comes and knocks at your door, looking to do work for you. Be extra cautious dealing with it. And that's not to say all of them are going to be bad, but be extra cautious. And be extra cautious as well of the people who put those flyers in your mailbox or on a poster, a bulletin board, public bulletin board, saying, I'll buy your house for cash. Because within that whole scenario, there is many, many fraud situations that have taken place.
Potential for sure.
Be careful of that.
Yeah.
Be careful of those
the only
people
other
that
thing
call
that
you
I would
in the
say
middle
to
of
you
the
though,
night to
Mike,
clean
is
your
that,
ducts too.
Say that again? Say that again?
I say be careful of those people that call you at all hours of the day and night telling you they're going to clean your ducts too.
Well, here's the thing. Be careful of anybody who wants to get paid up front before they do the job. So if someone wants to clean your ducts, great. They're probably not calling you from Barrie, because when you ask where they live, they say, I'm just down the street from you, and they didn't tell you where that is.
You can hear the room full of people making calls in the background. There's a call center.
Exactly. We got to go. But what I do want to wrap up with is fraud is not just necessarily taking money and disappearing, but fraud or misrepresentation can also be a contractor who goes out early in the spring and lines up all the business with zero capacity to fulfill the business, but tell you that they're going to be in finishing the job in 2 weeks or a month. They'll go and start the work like they did for me, pulling out the pool liner, telling me that they'd have it installed within 2 to 3 weeks. They pulled out the pool liner in April, and they weren't able to actually install the new one until September. What happened? They took the money. They eventually did the job, but my family lost the entire summer. That's a poor me story. It's still fraud. It's still misrepresentation.
Be patient, be diligent, and be thorough in investigating before you
Great parting words. We got to go. We want to thank you for joining us for this episode of Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. We will see you again next time on Rogers TV Barrie.